Spelling errors undermine your reader's faith in your document and in you. Knowing the basic rules of spelling can help you get things right. In this course, you'll learn how to spell words with prefixes and suffixes, and how to correctly form plural and possessive forms. You'll also find out some tips and rules to help you deal with tricky words. Prefixes and suffixes are useful tools to have in your writing toolkit. They can help you understand the meaning of words, as well as identify what part of speech a word is, whether noun, verb, adjective, or something else. The basic component of any word is its root, the part of the word that doesn't change. You can add prefixes at the start of the root to alter its meaning, and you can add suffixes to the end of the root to change its meaning, and its part of speech too. Take the root word assess. When you add the prefix re, you get reassess. The meaning of the word has changed from evaluate to evaluate again. When you add the suffix meant, you get another new meaning and a new part of speech. The verb assess has become the noun assessment. Prefixes come in 4 categories, depending on their meanings. The first category is prefixes that indicate quantity. For example, in the word unicycle and monorail, the prefixes uni and mono indicate the number 1 wheel, and 1 rail. In the words binary and dioxide, the prefixes bi and di indicate the number 2. Other prefixes are used to indicate negation. Words like immoral, invalid, unskilled, and impossible all include prefixes that mean without or not. Meanwhile, the prefixes anti and contra mean opposing or against, as in words like antiseptic or contradict. The third category indicates time. Ante, for, and pre mean before, but post means after. So if you precede someone, you go before them. But if you postpone something, you're putting it off until later. Finally, prefixes can be used to indicate direction or position. For example, trans means across. So if you take a transatlantic flight, you're going across the Atlantic Ocean. Super means above. So your supervisor is above you in your company's hierarchy. Suffixes, on the other hand, are often used to change the part of speech of a word. Suppose you take the root word consider. Depending on the suffix you add, you could change the root verb into a noun, an adjective, or an adverb. So you have the noun consideration, the adjective considerate, or the adverb considerately. You can use a suffix to change a root word into a noun, so assist can turn into assistance, tense can turn into tension, and real can become realist. You can use suffixes ending in al, ful, and ish to form an adjective. Nation becomes national, wonder can be turned into wonderful, and self can become selfish. Other suffixes like en or ize create verbs. Hard can become harden, and industrial can become industrialize. And to form an adverb, you usually add the suffix ly. For instance, thoughtful becomes thoughtfully, and open becomes openly. They're small pieces of language, but they can have a big effect. Understanding prefixes and suffixes can help you expand your vocabulary and communicate more effectively in your business writing. Think about the words self-esteem and reacquire. Both words include prefixes, but in self-esteem, the 2 parts of the word are joined by a hyphen, and in reacquire, they're not. What's going on? Well, the general rule is that you should avoid using hyphens when adding prefixes or suffixes, but there are some exceptions to this rule, as we'll examine. Normally, the prefix mid doesn't require a hyphen, as in midday. But when mid is followed by a number, you must use a hyphen. For example, when you're talking about the mid-1970s or the mid-20th century. Likewise, the prefix re, which means against, doesn't usually need a hyphen after it. But you should use a hyphen with re when you want to distinguish a word from another with the same spelling. For example, release without a hyphen after the prefix re is a statement to the press, But release with a hyphen after the prefix means leasing a property to a tenant again. Another rule is to add hyphens to ensure clarity. For example, you need to add a hyphen when you attach a prefix to a compound word. So the prefix ex is followed by a hyphen in the ex-attorney general, and the prefix pre is followed by a hyphen in the pre-existing condition. You use a hyphen for clarity when self is used as a prefix. For example, in the word self-confidence or self-esteem. You don't need a hyphen when you're adding a suffix to self though, as in the word selfish. When you're adding two or more prefixes to a common element, you use a hyphen after each prefix to make it clear that it relates to the common element. For instance, you'd write, "We completed pre, mid, and post-training assessments." Each prefix in the sentence is followed by a hyphen to make it clear each relates to the word training. You have to use a hyphen when you add a prefix to a word that begins with a capital letter. So that's words like mid-June and pre-World War II. You should also add a hyphen when a prefix ends in A or I, and the root word begins with the same letter. For example, ultra-active. Typically, when the prefix ends with E or O, and the root word begins with the same letter, you don't need a hyphen. For example, re-educate or coordinate. However, there are some exceptions, such as co-owner or de-emphasize. These take hyphens. Check a dictionary if you're in doubt. The trend in spelling has been away from the use of hyphens. More and more, people tend to leave them out wherever possible. So when you're trying to decide whether to use a hyphen or not, it can be useful to remember that if you can leave it out, you're likely going along with the majority. But if leaving out the hyphen causes any ambiguity or confusion, then err on the side of caution and add it in. When you add a prefix to a word, you don't have to change the spelling of the root word. But when you add a suffix, the spelling of the root word often changes. Let's examine this more closely. We'll start with the silent E that appears at the end of words like become, like, and give. When you're adding a suffix that begins with a vowel to those words, you usually need to drop the silent E. For example, take the verb continue. You can add the suffix OUS to make it continuous. But you have to drop the silent E in continue because the suffix begins with the letter O. There are exceptions to the rule though. When the silent E follows a soft G or C, you retain it. You can see this exception at work in the words changeable and noticeable. You keep the silent E at the end of the root in both cases. When the suffix begins with a consonant, you generally keep the silent E. So hope becomes hopeful and manage becomes management without losing the silent E. But as usual, there are exceptions. True drops the silent E to become truly, and argue drops the final E to become argument. Another rule for adding suffixes involves root words that end in Y. If the letter before the Y is a consonant, you usually change the Y to I. For instance, when you add full to beauty, you change the final Y to I to make it beautiful. If the letter before the Y is a vowel, you usually keep the Y. So when you add a suffix to the word annoy, you keep the Y to make annoyance. But again, some exceptions exist, like the one-syllable words day and say, where the Y sometimes changes to I. So the word day plus the suffix ly makes daily, and the past tense of say is written said. And you also keep the Y when the suffix begins with an I, so that you don't have two I's in a row. So cry plus ing makes crying. In general, you don't use hyphens when you add suffixes to words. So changeable, beautiful, and daily are all written without hyphens. But you sometimes need a hyphen when you add the suffixes less or like to the end of a word. If the root word ends in two L's, you add a hyphen so that the word doesn't include three L's in a row. For example, bell-like. If you follow these rules, you should be covered in most cases. But remember, if you find yourself in doubt, check a dictionary or word usage guide.